Welcome back to the BASCHAMANIA podcast. Back-to-back episodes this week, and I am excited for today's show with none other than Scott Green. Scott Green was the head coach at Wyoming Seminary, a prep powerhouse for 11 years, I believe, and now he is the associate head coach over at West Point, a name that is so prestigious, and I'm really, really excited to dive into a conversation with him. Before we do, this podcast is brought to you by our friends at Attack, A-T-A-C, Attack. It is an app for athletes. It's an AI strength and conditioning coach, a nutritionist, a mentality mentor, all in one app, all right in your pocket, your age, your goals, your program. We are all here to level up. And guys, Attack is what I wish I had as a younger wrestler in high school and middle school. It was harder to get trainers back then. And even now, if you don't have the financial resources to get a trainer, something like this can really, really benefit you. And that's one of the goals of this app, is to reach more people and to lower the cost and to lower the buy-in, per se, of having a trainer, of getting help. So download the Attack app. It's ATAC. It's in the Apple App Store. It's in the Google Play Store. And this app will truly help you level up. We are back. Scott Green, how are you?
I am doing well, Justin. How you doing?
I'm good, man. We don't have nearly enough coaches on this podcast. And, as many great tales of success people hear on this podcast from the wrestlers, I think it's truly the coach's impact that they all point back to as a huge part of their success. So I'm eager to dive into your brain and your experience and see how much value and entertainment we can pull out for wrestlers and fans. Quick rundown for people listening who might not know Scott Green. A couple quick facts from the West Point website. This is crazy. You coached 100 wrestlers, individual state titles, 41 of those 100 going on to win national prep titles. You guided the Blue Knights to 14 straight PA prep championships, 208-9 dual meet record with Wyoming Seminary since 2010. You won the national prep championships twice. That is quite the resume.
Yeah, we had a lot of success there in Kingston. Some of those state titles on the back end were John Gordon's, and I just kind of picked it up and ran with it from there. And really, really good to have been there for as long as I was, and to have the success that we had there, and to see some of those guys move on and have some success at the next level. Pretty gratifying too.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I want to kind of talk to you about your coaching career and talk about West Point now. Before we get there, I want to talk about some of the hard-hitting questions, get those right out of the way.
Okay.
Summarize for those who are not familiar why Wegmans creates a cult loyalty and love for those of us lucky to enjoy it.
Well, Wegmans is the quintessential kind of family-owned business, started in Western New York. We don't have to get too deep. You're a Rochester guy. I'm more of a Buffalo guy. For the rest of the country, they're probably seeing those two things as one and the same. But Wegmans, anyone who grew up in that area, it's woven into the fabric of the cities and the entire region. Going to a Wegmans store is a little different experience than your typical grocery store. And I think, I've borrowed this a couple of times when I'm talking about leadership, or I'm talking about culture and things like that. In Wegmans, the motto is you get our best every day. And I think that that experience, people who grew up in Western New York, if they go to somewhere where there isn't a Wegmans, they miss it. And they can't wait to get back there. And people who move to that area or have a Wegmans built in their area for the first time are absolutely shocked by the quality of products and the quality of the experience that they get there. So yeah, I'm a Wegmaniac if you haven't figured that out already.
And it's crazy too, because like you said, when you grow up with Wegmans, and then even if you go on vacation and you go to another state, or you're traveling for wrestling, whatever it is, and you're trying to just go, you get so used to what Wegmans can fill so many voids at once, whether you need a quick meal, preparing a feast for 20, it has everything. And when you travel and you can't get Wegmans, you're like, crap, what do I do?
Yeah, there aren't a lot of things that, Wegmans doesn't have. And like you said, from prepared meals to all the stocks that you would need to fill up your pantry, man, it's the place to be. The store brand is great. It's super high quality, but they carry just about everything there is to carry too. So
yeah. So obviously Wegmans lover, Bills fan. Fun fact you shared with me, you worked at the stadium as a kid. You grew up in New York. Tell me a little bit about your background, kind of the 101 for those who might not be familiar. I feel like if you follow wrestling, you know your name. You've been associated with so many high-level athletes and programs that your name is one of those that, regardless of when you start following the sport, you eventually hear your name. For those who are newer to hearing your name, what's kind of the 101 on your background?
Well, I mean, I think that if you would have known me in high school, you wouldn't have expected me to be still in the sport. We weren't, I'm not coming to coaching through my wrestling accolades by any stretch of the imagination. I was just a kid from Section 6 who loved the sport and, wasn't immersed in it, but didn't have a ton of success on the mat. But I always kind of felt I had something else to give to the sport, and it wasn't going to be through my physical prowess. It was going to be through coaching. So my high school coach would say this if he was listening. He would tell you that, for the most part, I was a critical part of coaching the team when I was in high school.
Interesting.
So that was something that I kind of knew early on was going to be important to me. So we had some local success with my high school teams when I was competing, and then went on to college. And again, all the lack of quote unquote success and high accolades that I had in high school, I followed up on that in college too by having absolutely no success on the mat, right? But I was in a good region. I was in a good area at Binghamton at the time, and I was kind of really put in touch with some mentors and some people that helped shape me as a coach a little bit further. And before I had even graduated from Binghamton, I had taken a high school coaching job. So that was like a pretty quick transition for me to get into high school coaching in Section 4 now, and to start a club there called Shamrock Wrestling Club, and really, get into the job of coaching kids year round and coaching kids to go to Fargo, to go to what at the time was Fila Cadets, and to shape their careers at a young age in my early 20s. And I've just kind of stuck with it and continued on this path for the last 3 decades.
Yeah. And speaking of coaching at different levels, you've done everything, like you said, from high school to college. I believe there were some world teams you were coaching. When you take these opportunities across various age levels, what is it that leads you to venture from one to another?
I mean, each move in my career was for different reasons. But I think, early on, I was bouncing from back and forth to a couple of high schools, just basically, what was the availability? What was the job availability in these tiny schools in Section 4? And, the backdrop for that was that I was running a club at the time out of, a couple of different high schools in that area. It's not like the club scene is now, right? We didn't have a facility or anything like that. We were just, I'd learned that early on. I wrestled for Alden High School, which wasn't a traditional power, but I also wrestled for Clarence Wrestling Club, which was the premier club in Western New York, run by Joe Rotundo. Shout out Tony, Tony's dad there. So, I knew right then and there in high school that, kids get better by networking and working with other kids. So I tried to bring that to Section 4 a little bit. With Shamrock, and then that just led to more opportunities, right? Pat Popolizio takes the job at Binghamton University. I knew him. I had coached him when he was on Team New York in Fargo. So I knew him, and that led to that opportunity. And then that led to the next major opportunity, which was Wyoming Seminary, because I had kind of, built up a little bit of a resume when that job came open. And then from there, back to college and Army West Point. So different family situations at the time, different, things went into all of those decisions, but you got to kind of follow the opportunities. And if you're not afraid to do that, there's a lot out there for you to pick up.
Yeah. And kind of a second part to that question, you mentioned that it wasn't your accolades that led you to coaching, whereas you see some of these guys now who if a guy like Yanni wanted to stop wrestling tomorrow, everybody would be throwing their hat in the ring saying, come coach for us. It's very
Absolutely.
accolade driven. He's also maybe a bad example because he has such a wrestling brain. But
Sure.
what I love that you said is that it wasn't necessarily the success you had in wrestling that helped you be a good coach. And I think similarly, I was never a good wrestler, but the gifts God gave me include being able to do a podcast and having the resources to do a podcast and get stories out. If there's somebody listening who maybe doesn't know where to start, but they want to be more involved, this is a sport where we can all benefit from more people, especially the right people, getting involved. How would you recommend somebody get involved? Because a lot of times it's very black and white. They want to do what somebody else does because it looks cool. Whereas coaching might not be for me, podcasting might not be for somebody else. What would you recommend for somebody who maybe wants to get more involved, but kind of holds himself back because they don't have the accolades they think maybe they should have?
Yeah, that's so true, right? Like we were talking about it in the office the other day, and someone had just gotten a job, and they'd been a successful assistant coach, produced All-Americans at a variety of different schools. And they just got a job, and the first line in their presser was that they were like an NCAA All-American, like 25 years ago, right? And you don't see that in other sports, right? Like if a guy gets a football job, maybe that last paragraph is about it, that he was an All-American in college or something like that. They're talking about what he's done as a coach. So that's a challenge, right? Because people see that and they're like, oh, like I can't get to that level of where I want to be because I wasn't a good wrestler. Now, that being said, I think the tide is turning a little bit. There's more what I would call non-traditional hires going on at the college level. There's more opportunities for people to open and start a club. There's more opportunities, man, like wrestling media. It's taken off, right? There's more opportunities for guys to get involved in that way. And then some of the jobs you see, like directors of ops, that's becoming a very common job. And you're seeing people who never wrestled before in those jobs because they got good business minds, and people are looking at them and saying, man, like, I don't need another version of myself to run this program, to be the director of ops. I need someone who's organized. I need someone who has some skills in relationship building and communication. So I think the tide is turning. And I think that's the key to that is to just like administrators and head coaches shouldn't be pigeonholing themselves into saying, I need this person to be this role. The same side, you like as a candidate or as someone who wants to be involved in it, you can't look and say like, okay, the only thing I want to do is this, right? You might start off in one position, and that might eventually get you to where you want to be as a college coach or whatever it is your goals. You might start by driving around and sleeping on people's couches and filming some content for them, and then the next thing you know, you've got your own Rockfin channel or you've got your own podcast. So you're not going to make any money, at least right out of the gate. You're not, right? So understanding that and being able to take different things that might lead you to where you want to go. I started driving 45 minutes every day as an assistant coach at Newark Valley High School, which had like 8 kids on the team. That was my first coaching job, and no one looked at me at that point in time and said, man, that guy's eventually going to be an associate head coach for a major Division I program. But if I had gotten frustrated right out of the gate because I couldn't get to where I wanted to be, and no one was saying, hey, come run our program, then it would certainly have been a different path that I had taken. So, I think that's my advice is you might have to start small, but, keep with it, stick to itiveness, and go where the opportunities are, and you get where you want to be.
It's funny too, because in my line of work with marketing, there's so many people that I tell, like, go do what you can do very good for free to build the opportunity, to build the relationship, and just to show what you're capable of. And it sounds like you're kind of saying a similar thing where it's like, go get opportunities to prove yourself, to show yourself, because you have so many people who are so entitled with, I know I'm capable of doing this job, so give me it. Well, go prove and go. We're in a world now where you can think outside the box on what you want to do and how you want to contribute. And like you said, it is not easy, but there are so many opportunities out there. And speaking of you as a coach, so often ask athletes about keeping the fire alive for winning. You got a guy like Burroughs or Taylor where they're winning Olympic and the world gold. And I'm always fascinated at what keeps that drive alive and keeps that fire burning. And I think as you're watching some of these major wrestling stars, there's ebbs and flows where they kind of like take a few months off to reignite that and keep that alive. For you as a coach, you know, when you have so much success and it's where I don't know what it's like when you have those accolades that I rattled off a few minutes ago, you know, where it's like 100 individuals winning state titles, that difference between 100 to 110, I'm sure it doesn't make a huge difference to you.
Right.
I'm sure you're not thinking about that individual number. What is it for you that kind of helps that drive stay alive, especially when you're talking about a coaching career you've had for so long?
Yeah, I think, you know, I'll frame this up to you in what I would miss if I wasn't coaching anymore, because I think that's the way to answer that question is, you know, if you sit down one day, you wake up and you say, man, I could be done coaching and I wouldn't miss much of anything about it, then you're probably done. Right. Yeah. So what do you miss the most? And I would miss being at big events. I would miss, you know, seeing guys get their hand raised, seeing them stand on the top of the podium, no doubt about it. But the thing I'd miss the most, and I've said this a couple of times to my wife and to some other people, I think I miss the most that 15 minutes before practice. You know, that's easy. That would be what I would miss the most. That's my favorite time of the day is you come in, everyone's putting their shoes on. You're seeing, you know, in high school, seeing the kids at the end of their school day where they're kind of dragging through and now they're excited to be at practice. You know, West Point, obviously, you know, they're coming in after, you know, some rigorous classwork and coming in ready to go, and everyone's putting their shoes on and hanging out and filling up their water bottle, and just the conversations that you have then, that's what keeps you coming back to work every day. Right. Because those are where the majority of your relationships are formed. And, you know, the people that you're going to stay in contact with 20 years down the line, they probably are good wrestlers, but they don't have to be, right? They can be guys who you just really built a relationship with in that time. And there's other down periods too. There's other times, bus rides or things like that. But I think coaching's relationship building, and that's what keeps you going. If you didn't have the opportunity to build relationships with young athletes, the X's and O's and the accolades, they get pretty hollow. They get pretty stale. Yep. And I know coaches who have felt that way. They're just like, yeah, we're winning, but man, this is not a team that I'm bonding with, or this situation just isn't the culture that I want to be in. So they moved on. So I think that's probably indirect/direct way of answering that question.
No, I think it's a good. I think it's a good way to put it. When I look at my high school career, you know, school ended at 2:15, practice started at 3. And that time in between was some of where the most memories were built. And even when Cal moved to Penn State and I started hanging out there more and more, you know, and he introduced me to the guys, I don't know, 10 years ago, and hanging around the guys and getting to know people before practice was such a, even when you're not on the team, it made me feel like an honorary alumni is kind of how I put it. Like you're in that fellowship. It's so important.
There you go. Yeah.
And I'm curious for you because, you know, you mentioned that some kids you form these relationships with. I had my high school coach in the podcast about a year ago now, because I ran into him at the barbershop. I haven't seen him in probably 10, 15 years. And he came up, told me how much he loves the podcast. And I was blown away that he even remembered me, because I wasn't a good wrestler. You know, I'm like, whatever, they're coaching so many kids. And I told my wife how humbling that was to, like, for him to start pulling back all these things. And when we did an episode of the podcast, it's probably the most fun I've had. And I'm curious for you, whether it's moving on to another school or kids graduating, what's the mindset like with athletes once they've graduated and moved on, or you've moved on? You know, I got to imagine there is that attachment to keep building and developing them. You know, as a Penn State fan, I think Bo Bartlett, right? One of your athletes, and now he's kind of out of your care. You're in a different place. He's in a different place. But I got to imagine there's still like a level of care that goes along with that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, like I'd say, like any kid that I coached at SEM that's in college, I'm rooting for them as long as they're not wrestling our guy, right?
Which is might be a problem soon. We'll talk about that in a few minutes.
Sure. Yeah, 100%. And we have some great conversations here on the flip side of that, like a Dalton Harkins who went to Malvern Prep, who was one of our main rivals in high school when I was at SEM, and there's plenty of trash talk exchange there. But like it's I always say, always in your corner, right?
Yep.
Like there's kids that there's kids that I coached years and years and years ago that I text with every week, right? And then there's kids that I hear from sporadically or every once in a while. But if you're in their presence, you walk in, you see them, and most times it's just like it just happened again last week. You know what I mean? Where you just kind of walk in and you're back in that rhythm again, and it's a relationship that's easy to renew. So. I think there's always keep an eye on a kid kind of thing. The relationship evolves over time and it changes, but it just doesn't stop because they're on a different team now. And hopefully, we swing back around at some point, and those are the kids who you like give a call to and say, hey, we've got a assistant coach position, or hey, like our RTC needs an athlete.
Yep.
Are you interested in that? Or maybe I'm coaching them on a world team somewhere down the line or something. So I think it pays dividends to stay invested in those relationships as long as there's boundaries.
Yeah, and speaking of relationships and athletes, Kennedy and Corinna Blades, I think, are superstars of this next decade. You've had the opportunity of coaching them. Izzy Martinez, when he was on here, gave you high praise. I'm curious, just speaking of athletes, your thoughts on their futures, and honestly, the future of women's wrestling as a whole, which I feel like is so bright right now.
Yeah, I think talking about, you brought up a bunch of accolades that I got at Wyoming Seminary that our teams were able to accomplish and everything. But I think probably the thing I'm most proud of from my time at SEM is establishing the girls program. That was something that was really important to me when I got there, and it was a lot of hard work that went into it to get it going. And now it's like one of the premier programs in the country, right?
Yeah.
Even with some graduation and things like that, it's established, and it's kind of a little bit of the standard for what. So, keying in on relationships and bringing in the right coaches and, involving USA, like that's something that'll endure, that's a little bit, sure, having like the national prep championship as a legacy, but establishing something new where it didn't exist before is something that I'm super proud of. And Kennedy and Corinna were cornerstones of that. I remember them being in 8th grade and Saul kind of driving them 12 hours to tour the campus and everything like that. And I obviously was with them for 4 or 5 hours that day, taking them around, explaining the process, explaining what our vision was. And man, like you could tell when they were 14 years old that these girls are superstars because they're not just every single bit of wrestling ability that they have and talent that they have is matched by their integrity, their charisma, their goofiness. They're just personalities that our sport needs. It's great to see them with the success that they're having. So it's a lot of fun to watch them blossom.
Yeah, I keep talking about it. It's like in the podcast, so I'm sure people are getting sick of it, but it's so cool that women's wrestling is building so much that as stars are at the tail end of their career, we're having girls like Amit Elor, like the Kennedy sisters, to have these superstars come on the scene. That's what helps the sport grow. And my next question, you've kind of indirectly answered throughout this episode so far, but going back to making coaching moves, what is that move like when you talk about what you've built at SEM? And for those who are maybe more of a casual wrestling fan, follow college wrestling, whatever it might be, Wyoming Seminary is a prep powerhouse. And you go from a powerhouse to a school like West Point that is still more in a building stage of the program. What is that shift for you like on going from one program to another that are kind of at, I would say, different points in their program?
Yeah. Like from a personal standpoint, I'd always kind of wanted to get back into college wrestling. I'd missed a lot of aspects of it. But, I had other opportunities, but West Point was the perfect one for me because I see a lot of parallels in the institution. It doesn't make a ton of sense because one's like like a fancy prep school, in the Northeast, that charges $55,000 a year, and the other one's military academy, right?
Right.
But both of them are kind of steeped in tradition. Both of them have a really they have wrestling in their DNA, right? That I think is important. Like you're going to a place that for the most part values wrestling, and it's part of the tradition of the school. Now, Wyoming Seminary, getting to the top, getting there, winning preps a couple of times, having a top 1 or 2 team in the country, for almost a decade. That's a challenge in and of itself, for sure. But you don't want to get complacent either. So when the situation in my family's life, my kids graduating from SEM, so on and so forth, there was no other tie to the institution other than my job there, right? We don't have family in Northeast Pennsylvania. I had done the kind of life's work that I had set out to do at that institution. And I just thought, guess what? It's time for a new challenge, right? And so West Point was very attractive. I had a good relationship with Coach Ward previous to that. I see this as an opportunity to work with great young men. There's plenty of other places that I probably could have latched on with in some role and gone to, and they would have been good jobs too. But the institution of West Point, I remember driving up for I think it was my second interview, and my wife, this was her first time on post, and we kind of drove on for the first time, looked around at the buildings, and you just step out and you feel, the history of the academy. And my wife was like, well, you're taking this job, so now it's just a matter of, the logistics of it, right?
Yeah.
So I think that was a good draw, and it's different, right? Back to building, back to trying to contribute, back to not being a head coach, which is an adjustment, but a fun one a fun role to play as well. So just thought it was time at that point in time to take on some new challenges that maybe I could have continued to add on to what was done at SEM, but maybe there was an element of, hey, we've accomplished everything that we can accomplish here, right?
Yep.
And now it's time to go somewhere else and take on some new challenges and keep it fresh, right? So that's kind of the genesis of that decision.
Yeah, and it's funny because we talk about Army West Point, and I've got a lot of friends locally that don't care about wrestling, don't follow wrestling, but they know I do this podcast. And if I tell them doing an episode tomorrow, they always ask who. And it's funny because I could rattle off all your accolades, won't mean nothing to them. But I say one of the coaches at West Point, and it's just eyes light up. West Point has such a prestige to it. I was buying some shirts the other day on the team store, and it's such a cool brand because you could put West Point anything on a shirt, on a something, and there's a sense of country pride to it. That military, the West Point brand, it is such a cool thing. And I'm curious for you what it's been like. You mentioned how important culture was at SEM. I'm curious what that culture has been like for you to go from driving up and seeing the buildings to now being a part of that and having your name in the mix. What has it been like being a part of something with so much prestige?
So I think, brotherhood amongst all wrestling teams is pretty strong. But I think it's kind of on steroids at West Point, right?
Yep.
Like brotherhood on steroids. These are guys that you see every day. Look, every cadet at West Point lives on campus, right? So these guys are as tight-knit of a group as you could possibly come up with. That was the case at SEM too for a high school because it's a boarding school. Yeah. But it's just because the aspect that these guys are going to serve together after they graduate from West Point, that they're going to become officers together. that creates a bond unlike any that I've ever been a part of or seen. Having not served myself, I'm kind of in awe of the athletes every day. And, like they get some say into where they go next and what branch of the Army that they're going to be in. And they all choose for the most part to be together, whether it's, in the infantry or down at Fort Polk or whatever it is that they wind up doing. They want to be with each other afterwards. And I contrast that with some other colleges where you got guys living off campus. Maybe their class schedule is a little bit different. Maybe we got 6 guys coming in for individual workouts. They're not practicing together. Our guys practice together every single day. And we have 45 guys on the roster. Some of them just know they're never going to see the mat again, or they're never going to be a primary part of what's going on the mat. They don't quit. They're still on the team. They're still there every day, knowing that, their competitive career is going to be limited because they want to be a part of it. Listen, like that doesn't happen in other schools. I think we all know that, right? College wrestling is too hard to put in the effort and to put in the work that you do in the practice room to not get the payoff of competing. So when people figure that out, they transfer or they stop wrestling, and that's nothing wrong with that. That's the reality of things. But that doesn't happen at West Point. These guys come in every day knowing they might be 7th string or something like that, and they put in the same effort as the guys who we're going to be putting out there against Iowa. So I think that is pretty special. And I think that's the type of wrestler that we attract, and more importantly, the kind of wrestler that we mold. So that everything that you're saying about West Point's brand and the mystique of it, 100% true. It's again, enhanced and amplified when you're actually experiencing it from the inside.
Yeah. And speaking of Iowa and the buildings, I want to try to get there in a couple of weeks. I'm trying to see if I can make it work. Mm-hmm. In a couple of weeks, for those not listening, you have West Point Winter Weekend, which might be the craziest weekend of wrestling. You guys host Iowa on Thursday. You have the Black Knight invite on Sunday with Penn State, Columbia, and others. The Bill Farrell's in New York City, 18th and 19th. West Point's hosting UConn football on Saturday. Absolute crazy weekend. Yeah. Tell me more about it. I also understand there's a cool story behind the Iowa duel.
Sure. So Stalemates fans out there know that one pretty well, right? So last year, like we want to make, West Point the focal point of the wrestling world for those 4 days and the region, right? So man, if you've never been here, make it a weekend. You get here for the Iowa duel, check out, you want to go on the train, go down to the city, watch some wrestling at the Farrell, go ahead. Got a football game on Saturday, and then some major heavy hitters coming into town on Sunday, but there's so much to do in the Hudson Valley. So we're excited about that weekend. We know that it's pretty tall order opening the season, 3 weeks in, but early in the season, taking on number 1 in number 2 within a 4-day period. It's pretty ambitious, but if you followed us last year, that's the MO, right? Like we'll run to the fight. We're ready to wrestle anyone, anytime, anywhere. And that really kind of proved to be true last year when we were out at Iowa State. We had a duel with them, and they were going to wrestle in the Cyclone Open the next day. And we're coming back from our workout after the duel. No, the workout the night before the duel, and I get a call from Tom Brands. And he says that Oregon State's jacked up. They're coming to wrestle us. They're jacked up. They can't get on the plane. They got to turn around and go home. He's like, you guys are in town. Will you come out and wrestle us on, I think it was like a Saturday, and come and wrestle them on Sunday or something like that, the day after the duel. And we were all kind of like, is this really happening? Right. And then, like just like serendipitous that Stalemates was there, like filming. Right. So it was like a nice kind of, all the stars kind of aligned because they got to catch a lot of that on video, which is great for branding and great for the sport to have content creators, and they were just right place, right time. So we kind of talked about it on the bus on the way home, and we're like, you know what, like are we really going to not take this opportunity?
Right.
Is it the smartest thing in the world to do? Maybe not, right? We planned on coming out and wrestling in the Cyclone Open and getting guys 4 or 5 bouts. We obviously haven't put a inch of preparation into wrestle Iowa. We're planning on wrestling Iowa State. We haven't prepared for them, scouted them, done any work to wrestle them. And so like logic might have been like, no, stick to the plan, do what you were going to do. But man, like to the chance to get into Carver, the chance to be able to do that was just too good to pass up. And I really think it fortified who we are as a team, that we're willing to take on those challenges. And did it pay off on that day? No, but will it pay off in the future of the program? Well, it's got Iowa coming back out here, right? It's got the team like that coming and taking us on in the duel. I hope everyone in the Hudson Valley shows up, and maybe they're going to come on and wanting to see Iowa, but they're going to leave Army wrestling fans if they attend that duel. So all that kind of background went into us kind of plotting this weekend and trying to get a wrestling fan something that maybe they don't normally experience, is like a full weekend slate outside of NCAAs.
I was going to say outside of middle of March.
Yeah, where you can come and man, there's so much to do here. There's something for everyone. There's going to be a football game. There's going to be a tournament. There's going to be a duel. There's going to be freestyle and Greco on a quick train ride down to the city. Like, just let us know what you want. And shoot, man, you get to like walk around West Point too, right? You get to see all of the campus in its full kind of winter glory. And man, if you haven't been here at least once, you got to check it out. And this is a great opportunity to combine those things together.
Yeah. And Chenzo and I just did an episode on Tuesday previewing the upcoming D1 wrestling season. And, I feel like a lot of times I know I pick the top guys to win, the top schools to win. And I always appreciate the guys like Corby and others out there who know, 50 guys in a weight. And it builds so much excitement to the sport to not just look at the top few schools. And it's cool because you're working in those top few schools. You're working in Iowa, Penn State, the schools that maybe the casual fan that I think is the target to build wrestling, is getting them to experience more. What's your expectation, not only for your team, but maybe yourself as a coach, to make this upcoming season a success? I don't think you're necessarily looking to knock off Iowa, though I'm sure you'd love to, but you're thinking more holistically. You're thinking building the program. You're thinking about taking the duel last year to build this weekend now. How do you manage those expectations when you take on such big opportunities? And I don't want to call them risks, because they're not really risks. It's an awesome thing to host Penn State, to host Iowa. And like you said, even if somebody's coming to see the Penn State kids, the Iowa kids, they can leave Army fans, and that's building the program. How do you kind of manage those expectations for the season?
Yeah. Well, I mean, those are early, right? So you want to schedule in some tough competition early on, so that guys can have a measuring stick, because the goal here is going to be to get guys on the podium at NCAAs. It always has been, and we need our team to start believing that that's where they belong. So you don't do that by wrestling a soft schedule and then showing up in Tulsa, seated like 28th and hoping to go on a run. You do it by wrestling those guys as often as you can. But building in other events too, right? So, we want our guys to compete every time that they're out on the mat, and we want our guys to understand that they're the same as everybody else in terms of how they approach the sport. We did a joint training camp this summer down in Raleigh. That kind of we were aiming at opening the eyes of guys, like all of a sudden these guys from NC State or North Carolina aren't guys that are ahead of them in the rankings. They know who they are. They've been in the room with them, right? Yeah. So exposing guys to the guys that they're going to have to beat to reach their ultimate goals is a key part of how we plotted out our season. So we want to go out and provide those opportunities and run to them to be able to get back in the workshop afterwards and say, all right, like that didn't go exactly how we wanted to. What do we got to do to fix it? What do we got to do to get you to that level? Or, hey, man, like that's a great start. You knocked off a guy who has some accolades or has a history in the sport. see, we told you, you're good enough. You believe in what we're doing. You believe in our training, and now we can build on that. So I don't consider them to be a risk at all. I think that it's just a mentality that you have to go into it with, and know that a process is a process, right? It's called the process for a reason.
Yep.
So if you don't get the results you want in November, trust us, trust yourself, and understand that we wrestled those matches early for a reason, and here's the reason, and here's what we're going to do with those results.
I'm curious too. One of the things that's intriguing as a fan to hear about, I think, is recruiting. I got to imagine recruiting at West Point is such a different, aspect to wrestling than maybe if you were coaching at just an Iowa, a Penn State, a school that's just, you're going to go to college somewhere, you're going to wrestle, and it's kind of a different playing field when you're talking West Point. There's so much more involved in that. What's that recruiting process like?
Well, remember, previous to coming back to West Point, I recruited at a high school that cost $60,000 a year, that required 14-year-old kids to move away from home.
Right.
And the alternative was free. They just went to high school where they lived. So I think every situation has its challenges, and you have some choices to make. And let's not, undersell the fact that getting Iowa in our home gym, wrestling these good competitions, that shows a prospective student athlete that, hey, these guys are serious about wrestling. I'm going to get opportunities if I go there. But with West Point, we kind of have, and I think all the academies, you got some decisions to make, because when you're recruiting, you can try to do what other schools are doing, or you can lean into what makes you great. And I think our decision, without question, is to lean into what makes you great. Right. So you're going to come here, and you're going to be in a rigorous academic environment, which a lot of kids crave. Right. You're going to graduate a second lieutenant in the United States Army, which is a pretty good way to start out your career. And then when we start talking to kids and we show them that, hey, I know a lot of people talk about like unmatched alumni networks and things like that. We just point to the alumni from West Point, like Ulysses S. Grant, Robert E. Lee, Dwight Eisenhower. We're doing okay in that department too. We've built a pretty good network as far as that goes. And then you kind of just get into the details of it. And once you pull that mystique that we were talking about before off, and really get into the nuts and bolts about what a West Point education can do for you, and what that service means and what that looks like, and the details. People don't know, right? They don't know until they get to an academy. They think they know. They have someone who told them they know. They have someone else who told them, don't do that. You don't want to be in the Army.
Right.
But until we can get, the information in their hands, and obviously get them on campus, they don't really know. You don't know what you don't know. So that's what I always say. And then the other thing that's been working in our favor is we had a great kid, PJ Ogunsanya, who got hurt in his senior year and kind of tried to limp through it and get back for NCAAs and didn't look himself. But what he was able to do this spring, with second at the U.S. Open in Greco and then winning U23s, that's allowed us to highlight the WCAP, the World Class Athlete Program, which is a major thing for a wrestler. We want kids to come here hoping to wrestle for West Point, be All-Americans while they're here, graduate second lieutenants, and then continue their careers in WCAP. And WCAP, we would say, we have an RTC too, but WCAP, man, that's an opportunity, because you're getting paid to represent your country, and you're doing that by wrestling. You got to bet on yourself, because it takes a certain threshold of accomplishments to get there. But PJ's success and his entry into the WCAP program in Greco-Roman has really kind of turned a lot of heads in the recruiting process. They're like, wait, I can do that too. And we're like, yeah, absolutely. You want to move on, you're not dependent on someone donating money for your salary. You're not dependent on, hoping that you have an opportunity at an RTC. You're a second lieutenant getting paid to be a second lieutenant and beyond, and your job in the Army is to wrestle. So once we can get people to to shed that whole, there's a certain mold, there's a certain type of kid only that can go to West Point. Man, like the Army's diverse. Like we need free thinkers in the Army. We need everybody. We need people to say, man, I want to be a great wrestler. Now tell me about this other part of West Point, not necessarily in the reverse order. And so we're shifting that paradigm, we're shifting that dynamic, and we're having some success with it. And we hope to continue to build on that.
Yeah, and speaking of WCAP, I had Jenna Burkett on here a couple of years ago talking about how cool it is to be able to wrestle and represent your country and also serve your country. So you definitely, if you want more on that, go back and listen to when Jenna was in the podcast. Definitely a favorite episode.
Jenna has never been at West Point. I'm working on changing that. She has never been. She grew up on Long Island and she's never been to.
We gotta, Jenna, if you're listening to this, you got to get to West Point.
She and I have had conversations about it, and we're working on that. So yeah,
that's a must-have. I have a final question for you, but before I get to that, I do want to kind of go back real quick to talking about using your talents for wrestling and, not relying just on accolades. If there's coaches listening that want to be a better coach, you've had a lot of success, and I'm not going to ask for your whole formula. I'm sure you can write a book on your formula for coaching success, but what's kind of the overview for how someone, in your opinion, can be a successful coach in the sport?
I mean, you got to get deep into and invest in the relationships that you're trying to build. That I think is the key, and I think probably everyone would tell you that. But I can't really overestimate that enough. And then I think you got to be willing to maybe evolve is the right word. But before you evolve, you have to be willing to, I always said this because I was a teacher for years, you have to examine your practice, right? And that's hard because you learn something one way and you're 100% positive that it's going to work. But when it's not working, do you continue to try to force that in there, or are you reading? Are you listening to podcasts? Are you out there trying to find current information, current research on what works? If you think the kids, that today's athlete is the same as the athlete that you were when you were in college, I'm gonna just tell you the reality is they're not. And so you can be stubborn and say this is the only way that we're going to do things, and people have to adapt to that, or you can evolve. You can examine your practice, and that doesn't always lead to you changing, but sometimes it does. I think one of the things that I like most about working for Coach Ward is that he and I have some pretty different approaches to a lot of situations, but we have the best interest of the student athletes involved at all times. So we provide each other with some pretty valuable feedback. And then you throw Jeff Breeze in there, Ian Parker, a new young kid, who's hungry to learn. We got a great dynamic in our college, in our coaching room. And I look at some staffs, maybe this is changing a little bit, but I look at some staffs and their staff is just 4 slightly different versions of each other. So how does that produce growth? That's important to us, is to have people at different stages of their lives with different perspectives to help the whole program grow. And you need to be open to that. I think if you're gonna be a successful coach.
Yeah, that's a lot of wisdom right there. My final point for you before I let you go is that I agree with you in the highly contentious debate that it is states. It is not state. Yeah. I think if you grow up in New York, it's an obvious. You don't even need to argue it. It is states with an S, not state.
It's as obvious as never like cooking wings on a grill. They have to be fried.
So here's the I saved the contentious part of this podcast for the end. You do not believe in ranch or boneless wings. Now, I live in Rochester, New York. I think upstate New York, Buffalo, Rochester, I think is the capital of wings. There's a reason they're called Buffalo wings. I think this area is wings, and I have wings probably 2-3 times a week.
Yeah.
Sometimes my wife and I like boneless. Sometimes it's regular wings, mild, as traditional as they come. Where did this beef with ranch and boneless wings start?
Well, I think it was growing up in the mecca of wingdom, right? Is like I don't know how old you are, a little younger than me, but when we were growing up, you didn't have garlic parmesan wings or things
Right.
like that. You just went to John and Mary's or Duff's or something like that, and they came in hot, medium, or mild, right?
Yep.
And they came with blue cheese and celery and carrots, right? So food traditionalists, you can have some pretty strong food opinions. I have some food opinions that I would think, to someone from I don't really get too fired up on which type of barbecue sauce is better, Kansas City, St.
Right.
Louis, all that stuff. Like, I'm like, oh, it's all pretty good. I'll eat all of it, right? But you can't tell that to somebody who's look, wings are woven into the fabric of who we are. We're Western New Yorkers, right? So if you can't take that seriously, yeah, what are you doing? And for me, for ranch, like if you're over 12 and you're still eating ranch dressing, grow up. All right. Like, come on. Ranch and ketchup are little kid condiments that you get to give to your kids to eat stuff they don't like. All right.
Do you eat chicken fingers?
Yeah, occasionally. Not
So, I
too
mean,
often.
isn't that kind of like a boneless wing? Like, I feel like a boneless wing is like a chicken finger cut up.
Okay, but chicken finger. So here's another thing that's a bone of contention. Aha, see what I did there? Is that I think buffalo chicken fingers is a relatively new thing too.
Yeah.
For the most part, when you were eating chicken fingers, and everyone else who's listening is saying chicken fingers, they're chicken tenders. So that's another thing that we share here.
Yeah.
But chicken fingers, chicken tenders were just fried chicken, and then you had a variety of dipping sauce, usually barbecue or sweet and sour or something like that. They didn't put Franks and butter on them, So I think that's the difference. Is boneless wings are like a perversion of perhaps the greatest food on the planet. Chicken, I used to be an English teacher. I'm a wrestling coach, but I'm going to tell you, I've seen chickens and their wings have bones. Right? They do. I'm positive of this. Okay. So there's no such thing as boneless wings. Now, if you want to say you're eating buffalo chicken fingers or chicken nuggets, I mean,
not as big of a qualm.
I'm not gonna go to your house and get angry with you if that's what you want to do.
One of my all-time favorite Scott Green tweets. I had to go back and look for it because I vaguely remembered it, but I couldn't get it verbatim. It was back in 2019. You said, anyone not from New England that calls themselves a Pats fan probably also eats boneless wings with ranch.
They probably do. Yeah, with the chowder. But yeah, if you're not from New England, and you root for the Patriots, man, I don't know. I don't got much for you there.
Yeah, I mean, Patriots fans don't got a lot of nothing. They don't know if they got Zappy and Mac Jones. They don't know what's going on. They don't know what they're eating.
Hey, I'm enjoying it, man. Like, look, you've been through it like I have, so this is a great era to be a Bills fan. And like they've done studies in Buffalo and productivity on Monday in warehouses and factories is higher the Monday after a Bills win than it is after a Bills loss. Like, talk about identifying a franchise with the city. The Bills is where it's at. You'll never convince me that there's a tighter connection with
there's not. And it's funny watching Patriots suffer through stuff that we normally would, like the game. I don't know if you watched it Thursday night or Monday night, whenever it was, Sunday night, when they're suffering through, Mac Jones has a bad couple of starts. They take him out. They put Zappy in. No, that didn't really work. Okay, let's start Mac Jones this week. That's stuff that we as Bills fans have suffered through for the last decade. It's nice to watch them suffer.
It is. It's a little Schadenfreude there, but I will take it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. All right, Scott, I'm going to let you go on your day. Thank you so much. Any final words before I let you go?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk. And let's get BASCHAMANIA down to the Hudson Valley, downstate a little bit for a Western New Yorker, and check out West Point.
Yeah, it won't be long until I'm there. That's definitely a bucket list item. So, all right. Coach Green, have a great day. We'll talk soon.
Okay, thanks. Take care.
Awesome. Thanks.
And the beat goes on.